Hello, and welcome back to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we are continuing on with the Missing Linked Parts series of videos. And today we're going to start talking about the Parts Manager, which can be found in the Document menu, and we're looking for the option called Manage Parts, and that pulls up the Manage Parts window, or the Parts Manager, as I like to call it. And so this is what we're dealing with. Now, if your window looks like this, where it's nice and skinny, so you're not seeing the whole thing, just go down here and choose the Edit Part Definition button, and that will open up the entire thing, and this is what we want to deal with. Now, the way that this works is that you see three columns here, and the column on the left is the list of the linked parts that exist in your file. So you can see flute 1, 2, all the way down to double bass. The column in the middle, for each selected linked parts, will tell you what staff exists in that linked part. Now, most of the time, this will be a one-to-one type of thing. So in your flute 1 linked part, you're going to see the flute 1 staff. The flute 2 is going to show the flute 2 staff. The bassoon 1 is going to show the bassoon 1 staff, etc. In the right-hand column, you'll see the rest of the instruments that are available to be added to that part, because each linked part doesn't need to be just one staff. Most of the time it will only need to be one staff, but you can add as many staffs to any linked part that you want, and we'll get into that in a little bit as we're going through this. But as you can see, in the flute 1 linked part, we only have the flute 1 staff, and all of these other instruments would be available to add to it. In the flute 2 linked part, we're showing flute 2 here, but flute 1 is available, but not flute 2. So basically the totality of this staff plus all of these staffs is basically every staff in the score, is how that works. Now, this list here of linked parts will match exactly the list that you see here in the Edit Parts item here. You'll see this list of linked parts, and in fact the order of these linked parts here will also match with the order here. Now, I showed you in a previous video how to add linked parts, and the easiest thing to do, honestly, if you're going to just add an instrument, is to go into the Score Manager and go ahead and add an instrument. So let's do that here. We're going to add an oboe beneath our flute 2 part. So let's go in here, woodwinds oboe, and you'll see that it gets added below the flute 2 in the score, and in the score it exists there as well. However, in the linked parts, you'll see that it gets put all the way at the bottom. Finale will always add the linked parts in order like this, so the last linked part created will go at the bottom of the list, which doesn't always look right because you probably want that oboe linked part to exist between the flute 2 and bassoon 1. This is easily fixable in the Manage Parts window. These little buttons here on the right of the left-hand column will move the linked parts up and down in the order. So all you have to do is choose your oboe there and press the up arrow, and you'll see it kind of go up in the order, and now it exists below flute 2. And when you click OK, it actually does change the order of this list. So that's just a little housekeeping business there with keeping these linked parts in order. Now, as you saw, when you add an instrument in the Score Manager, it automatically creates a linked part. There is one other way to actually add a staff in Finale, and that's with the staff tool itself. If you select any staff, you can go up here and go to New Blank Staves, and you can add as many as you want. Let's just add one for now, and you'll see that you'll get a new blank staff added above that oboe. When you add a staff in this fashion, you're not adding a linked part. There's nothing that gets added to the bottom of the list. In fact, this is just a blank staff, so we don't even know what instrument that is. If you wanted to make an instrument out of that, you'd have to do that manually in the Score Manager, decide what it's going to be, and then manually add it in the Parts Manager so you get a linked part. Suffice it to say, this is not the most efficient way to add staves in your scores. Obviously, it's much easier, as you saw, just to add it in the Score Manager, right? And since I'm here, we have this oboe part. Also, when we delete instruments from the Score Manager, it will delete the linked parts. So if I go over here and press the X to get rid of that oboe that we just created, it also gets removed from the list of linked parts. So the Score Manager and the Parts Manager are kind of intertwined like that. And there's another way that they're intertwined, which I'm going to get to in a second as well. Now let's talk about some of the other options in here, starting with this one called Generate Parts. You're going to use this if for whatever reason there are no linked parts in the file already. Most of the time when you add new instruments, or all the time when you add new instruments in the Score Manager, obviously it's going to add your linked parts for you, but occasionally you may run into a file like this one where there are no linked parts. And in fact, if you go to the Edit Parts menu item here, you'll actually see the generate parts. Now this generate parts is the same function that you find here with this button. It does the exact same thing, so it doesn't matter where you choose that. And when you press generate parts, it will do just that, and it will take every staff, every instrument rather, that you have in your score and create a linked part out of it. So now we have this whole situation. The one thing I will caution you about, though, is that when you have linked parts in your file already, and if you start making changes and everything, and move things around so that you're making changes to the layout of the linked part and all that stuff, if you were to go back into here and press the generate parts button again, it's going to tell you generating new parts will replace all existing parts in the document. Would you like to do that? Would you like to continue? And if you press yes and press OK, what should happen is that your flute 1 part is going to be completely reset. So any changes that you made will get destroyed. So really, you should really only ever use that generate parts button if there really is no linked parts in the file already. Now, let me just go back to that original file here. Not that it matters, it's sort of a duplicate. So we can create as many linked parts as we want. We don't have to be limited to just the linked parts that Finale has given us using the score manager. We can create any combination of linked parts. We can delete a linked part. So for whatever reason, we don't want the clarinet and A part, we just select that and press delete. And I'm not going to do that because I don't want that to go away right now. But we can also create a new one. Let's put a new one below clarinet and A. So if you have one selected and you press new part, you'll get a generically named part, in this case part 13. And you'll see that with that selected, there are no staves in this part yet. So we're going to have to decide what staves that we want to include. Now, the first thing I'm going to do before I even do that is I'm going to give it a name, because right now it has no name, it's blank. So we can just go to the edit part name here, and we'll get this little window, and we can put whatever part we want in here. So let's call this violin 1/2, because we're going to create a combined violin part, right? And click OK, and you can see that we've just changed that name to violin 1-2. And that should appear in the linked parts list, violin 1 and 2. Of course, there are no staffs in that linked part yet. So if you actually go to that part, that you'll see that it is actually blank. The other thing that I want to mention is that you can literally change the name of any part that you want just by going to edit part. So if we call this, we could say this green flute, and you'll see that now it is called green flute. Now, there's another way to change the name of the linked part here, and I'm going to show you that. If you actually go into the score manager and take one of these instruments and change the full name here, so let's take the second flute here and call this red flute, and click OK. So now the name of the second flute is called red flute, and you can see it over here. It's called red flute 2, actually. And we go into the edit parts. You'll notice that it actually does change the name automatically. So in another way, the names between the score manager and the manage parts window are linked. However, if you were to change the name here, you see me change it to green flute by using the edit part name within the manage parts window. This effectively unlinks the name of the part from the score manager. So now if I were to go into the score manager and edit that flute 1 part, and instead of flute here, I'm going to call it blue flute, it will turn to blue flute in the score. It will say blue flute in the score, but it will still say green flute in the linked part, okay? So that's sort of the order of how this works, is that if you change the name in the score manager first, it will make that change in the manage parts window. If you change the name in the manage parts window, then it becomes unlinked, and then you can change the name in the score manager as much as you want, and it will never affect the name of the linked part in the manage parts window. All right, so let's go down to this violin 1-2 combination part that I've created, and let's actually figure out how to do this. So once you have this selected, again, it doesn't have any staffs in it yet, so we haven't defined what this looks like. So what we want to do is just go over to the available instruments list and choose the violin 1 part here, and use this button that says add to part. And then you can see that it just basically moves it from the right column to the middle column. And now this violin 1-2 has the violin 1 part. We can choose violin 2 and add it to the part. And you can see that now we have both the violin 1 and the violin 2 part in the violin 1-2 linked part, right? Now, when you're dealing with these instruments in the middle column, if you have more than one, it will give you this move up or move down button. So this is actually how you would reorder them within this middle column, is with these buttons here. Move up to, so that when we're in the reverse order, move down so that we're in the appropriate order. And now we click OK, and we should see in the linked part a violin 1-2 combined part that has both the violin 1 and the violin 2 part. Now, when you do things like this, you'll have to create groups within the linked part. As you can see, there's no group linking these two parts together, and that's easy enough to do. If you know how to do this, just go to Staff. I did a whole lesson on this in the Staff Tool Strategies, but just groups and brackets, add, and we can do something like, let's just add this little bracket here, and click OK, and now we have a group that connects the violin 1 and 2 part. And if we wanted to actually show the names, we can go into the staff attributes, and there's this button here for staff name in parts, and check that for the violin 1 and check that for the violin 2. And now we can actually show the names, although I'm going to have to fix this later. You can actually show the names within the linked part as well if you want to do it like that. And then let's talk about grand staff instruments. This score doesn't have any grand staff instruments, so let's actually just add one. Let's say we're going to add a harpsichord below our clarinet and A. So let's go to keyboards, find the harpsichord. There we go. And a harpsichord is a grand staff instrument, meaning that it has two staffs to it. And when you add an instrument in the score manager that has two staffs, Finale will appropriately give you the linked part. Of course, it's in the wrong order. We know how to fix that. Just bring that back up here. It will appropriately put both staves in the linked part. And you can see there's a little arrow here, so you can see that both your right and left hand staves are in the harpsichord part. When you do it like this, the harpsichord group, you can see that there's a group here with a harpsichord name and the bracket and everything. When you do it in this fashion, the harpsichord part, oops, I didn't change the order. The harpsichord group will, in effect, copy over to the linked parts. Now, I've talked about this before, but these groups are now independent of each other, so any change here that you make will change the harpsichord group in the linked part, but not in the score. So I just remove the harpsichord name in the part, and it still remains in the score. Now, what's interesting is that you can actually add, let's just move that where it's supposed to be. I'm just going to create a new part, and I'm just going to call it test for a second. You can add individual instruments or individual staffs from a grand staff instrument. And in fact, in this little test linked part, I'm going to go over here to my available instruments and just open this little triangle. And I can, if I really wanted to, let's just say I'm going to add the left hand part. And for whatever reason, I'm going to add the clarinet and A part. So now I'm creating sort of an interesting linked part that has the clarinet and A solo plus the left hand of the harpsichord. So that's always possible to do as well. You don't need to bring over the whole group. However, you can bring over the whole group just by selecting the whole thing and adding it to the part. And when you do bring over a whole group, once again, the test linked part here will copy over the group settings once again. So that's just kind of what's going on there. And let's just get rid of that test linked part. One other thing that you may not realize is that you can also, oops, go back to the score here. You can also use hidden parts for your linked parts. So what I'm going to do here is actually at the bottom, I'm going to add a piano part. All right, and I'm going to call this rehearsal piano or something. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to actually hide this from the score. So let's go into scroll view here. And with the staff tool, I'm just going to double click, choose force hide in score only for the right hand and force hide in score only for the left hand. So now this rehearsal piano part will not actually appear in this score, which is getting longer and longer by the minute as I keep adding instruments, but you get the idea. It should be down here. But it does not exist there because it's hidden. However, we can still use that that staff or that instrument for a linked part. So if we go in here and, of course, it created a brand new linked part. Let's just delete that so we can start over. And let's create a new part, and I'm going to call this rehearsal piano clarinet, right? So this would be your rehearsal score for your pianist and clarinet with a piano reduction. And you click OK, and then we're going to add instruments to it. So I'm just going to add the clarinet solo, and then I'm going to add that rehearsal piano part, just like that. So using a hidden part, basically, from the score, we can actually create a linked part that has a rehearsal piano clarinet part like this. And you'll see the rehearsal piano part plus the clarinet part, which does have some notes over here, although the rehearsal piano part does not yet. So that's also another thing that you can do. You can use hidden staves in your linked parts. That's totally possible. And then let's talk about this one button here, Part Creation Preferences. This brings up another window. Now this window, these part creation preferences are what's being used when a new part gets generated. So whether or not you press the Generate Parts button to create all the linked parts, or if you're adding a new instrument and the part is being generated automatically, it will consult these settings. Now there's a few things going on here. You can automatically create the multi-measure rests. In this case, I have it turned off, so all of those new parts that I had created did not have multi-measure rests, as you can see. If you check that, then it will automatically create those multi-measure rests. Sometimes this is desirable, sometimes it's not, depending on what you're doing. We also have the option to apply a specific type of spacing to the part when it gets created. So you can choose beat, note, or time signature spacing. If you're using note spacing in your score, you might as well apply note spacing to the parts as you generate them. You can also copy the spacing from the score. This will actually copy some of the specific overrides that you've made to the spacing within the score, but this can get tricky because sometimes those overrides that you make in the score can be specifically for the purpose of other things in the score that wouldn't exist in the linked part. So you can use this, but you kind of have to know why you'd want to use this and what you're doing with that. The multi-measure rests button here and the music spacing options button here will take you to two different places within the document options in the document. Now these are not any different. These are going to be exactly the same. It's just sort of a shortcut to these two particular panes within the document options. They're not specifically for the parts. It's going to apply for the score and the parts either way. We do have the option to fit a certain number of measures per system when the parts get generated. If you want, you can do that. Choose 4 and you'll get 4 on a system. With the sub option to treat multi-measures rests as a single measure. With this checked, if you have a multi-measure rest of 7 measures and then music, what you'll get is a 7-bar multi-measure rest followed by 3 bars of music on the same system. So depending on how you're doing this may not be desirable. If you're doing commercial music where you want to lay out 4 measures of system, you probably want to leave this turned off because you want your 4-measure multi-measure rest to actually take up the whole system. So with this turned off, that will allow you to do that. And then we have the space systems evenly, and I'm going to refer you to video 21-1 in the Perfecting Page Layout series. This will do exactly what this option does normally. And then, of course, the page format for parts, this is going to take you to that page format window for the parts that you can normally find in the document menu. Again, this is the same exact window. It's just a shortcut to this window, and everything in here functions the same way. So these are just sort of shortcuts to those particular places that are relevant to some of the things that you might need to deal with when you're creating parts. All right, and then the final thing I'll say about this is that once the part has been generated, it doesn't matter what changes you make here. This will not like retroactively change parts that are already created. This is just for the creation of new parts. Once the part has been created, it's on its own, basically. So that's how that works, all right? And then finally, there's one other option in this menu, the Specify Voicing and the Edit Voicing window. I'm going to talk about this in the next video because this is super complex and interesting, and this is basically where we're going to do things like share staffs for an instrument. So if you had flute 1 and 2 on the same staff, you can have separate linked parts that both employ that shared staff, and with the edit voicing, it will parse out the specific voice that you need for that particular linked part. It does get a little semantic and complicated, so that's why I'm dedicating an entire video just to that edit voicing functionality in Finale. So that's the parts manager in a nutshell. I hope this has helped. We're going to deal with the edit voicings in the next video. So once again, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you soon on the next missing linked parts video.